In the last lecture I had, I was simply going over the legacy of Louis the 14th, and you can see a picture of him in the textbook. Um, and then the section is going to talk about Spain. I'm actually going to skip over most of this for the lecture part, but I want you to read it again. It's not. It is something I want you to understand. In this map, I just thought I would show it illustrates the decline of Spanish power in Europe at this time. And what I just kind of like, especially for us as Americans in the United States to realize, is a sense of geography and a perspective, in that the United States coming out of the West, specifically this chunk of land over here, right, what we now call the British Isles, is going to bring over the legacy that's going to come here from the continent. And our neighbors, which we are really quite historically illiterate on often, is South Central, Mexico, Central America, South America. And the main language in the Western Hemisphere would be Spanish, right? And Portuguese in Brazil. So here's Portugal. Okay, here's Spain. And Spain was a major player in Western Europe, but it's going to start declining, attempting authoritarianism, but with not the success that's going to be happening with France here. Okay, and so I just kind of wanted to point that out because Spain is not brought up even much or thought about in politics or on the news and North American media, but of course the Spanish language is. And so the legacy of this part and this part on the map are very much a legacy of where we're living at geographically, right? And so in any case, I just kind of wanted you to think about that and get that perspective. And by the way, notice that Spain is almost connected to Africa, Morocco specifically. So that puts some perspective on things too, right? Okay. All right, so I'm not going to talk too much about this. I gave you a lecture from another instructor at the beginning about the 30 Years' War, which was important, and this section was talked about. But again, I think what I want you to just kind of think about with this, because this is a very confusing section as well. I think it's very difficult if we don't have a background on a lot of the geography and monarchies and then these kingdoms and then these battles, and so we're getting dates and names and all these people, all this drama they were trying to cram down your throats, and it's just kind of like, what is going on, right? It's so jarbled. What I would like you to do is just think about this in context to what we see happening in World War I and World War II. That we don't have a Germany, really. Okay, we had the Holy Roman Empire, which was very big, and you'll hear this quote so much, but I think it's really great. It was quoted by the instructor that talked about the 30 Years' War, where the French, 18th century French philosopher Voltaire said, "The Holy Roman Empire was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire." And not only is it witty, I think it helps kind of us really conceptualize like just that, that it was a fantasy to kind of see it as a part of the legacy of the Roman Empire, but it didn't have. It wasn't very centralized. If you look in this page 508. 5.7, 508 to 5.10. It really kind of clarifies this kind of very oddly created conglomeration that you would call an empire, and then it breaks up afterwards and you end up getting eventually what we're going to call Prussia. Now, this might be confusing to a lot of you, and of course, Prussia sounds a lot like Russia. I remember when I was in high school, that was something that kind of like confused me. And these are German people, German speakers, but we don't have a German state yet, okay? And we have different pockets of Europe speaking German to each other, which is also why things get complicated. And in World War II, you know, Hitler was trying to maybe resolve a certain nationalist question about German identity and what would be considered Germany. And this is what I want you to think. I mean, unfortunately, the terrible legacy of Hitler and the Nazis is so bad, but so much of what you learn about Hitler is simply the bad results that happened, which I'm not going to minimize. But the vision or what the Germans are thinking about, German nationalists in particular, and the legacy of that, and the fact that there's German speakers in Czechoslovakia, even huge portions. This whole idea of romantic nationalism that's going to come later on about who has a right to land, and if German-speaking people live in a land, isn't that Germany? So how would they be separate? Can it really be a part of Czechoslovakia? These are the kind of things that are going to come up in nationalist discourse that were not resolved from this time period, okay? So I kind of want to put this into context of what we're going to talk more about in detail of going on to the world wars later on in the 20th century. And I think that then you'll kind of see this continuity of unresolved issues, okay? And yeah, perhaps it's a question if it's resolved now. Okay, and so you end up having, like I said, the growth of the Prussian state. You have the Hohenzollern family, one group of monarchs, okay? Here is again the map. And by the way, Sweden was a player for a while. My great-grandfather was Swedish. But I think Sweden, kind of around this time period, starts not really being seen as a major player in world politics. But that's the interesting thing, right? How strange it is that certain nations, this island here is going to conquer half the world. Just looking at geography and looking at the size of land masses and all this kind of stuff, it's not really easy to tell who's going to be what in the future, right? Okay, so let's see here. All right, so I just then quickly want to talk about the Austrian Habsburg monarchy, and this is also important too because remember, Austria, they speak German, and in a sense, I think totally different history. But think about how, from an outsider's perspective, does Canada and the United States seem that different? And so do Austrians seem that different than Germans to outside perspectives? Well, culturally both are different in many respects, but there's also not. And in this case here, you have Martin Luther creating a Protestant legacy, and here we are also seeing a Catholic still legacy of repression. And just keep in mind, again, I grew up, both my families are, one side's Catholic, one's Protestant, but I grew up under more of the Protestant narrative. It was always the bad Catholics doing mean things to Protestants. But historically, again, if you look, both sides, when it came to being a part of the political system, were using the state to suppress their enemies, and mob violence took place on both sides. Okay, so they were not able, though, to really formulate an absolutist state in the way that they would have liked. Now, on the map, if you were looking, you would see that they are very close to the Ottoman Empire. And I'm just going to do a discussion of that next before I move on to the next section. I think it's very important and has been many times neglected from the discourse of Western civilization. And so I'm glad the Ottoman Empire topic is being brought in more to Western civilization education for various set of reasons, which I'll explain in the next lecture.